Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another webinar from the American Tennis Association. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I wanted to just let you know that we're going to have the presentation tonight. You're in listen only mode, but please interact with us. At the bottom of your toolbar is an icon that says Q&A. Please put your questions in there for the doctor, and we will be taking questions at the end of the presentation tonight. Lots of great information, and I know you all have wonderful questions. So with that, I'd like to introduce the president of the American Tennis Association to give you a warm welcome. So with Roxanne Aaron.
Good evening and welcome. The American Tennis Association was founded 104 years ago in 1916. We're the oldest African-American organization in the US. I could spend an hour talking to you about this wonderful organization. But to learn more, please go to our website at yourata.org. But I prefer to introduce our speaker this evening, Dr. Reggie Eadie, CEO of Trinity Health of New England. Dr. Eadie has over 20 years of healthcare experience. He received his medical degree from Wayne State University School of Medicine and holds an executive master's of business from Michigan State. He has been named the 100 physician leaders to know. He also serves as board chair of the American Heart Association. When you get a chance, check out his YouTube. You get the facts on the vax. So, but what I want to say before I end this is that for those of you who are members of Omega Psi Phi, here's your brother. So now, I'd like to introduce and thank you again for joining us, Dr. Eadie.
Thank you very much, Roxanne, and thank you, Deanne, for assisting in getting this production moved forward. So it's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to jump right in so that we can get to, I think, the reason why we are here, and that is to get to more information around the vaccine. So I prepared a presentation. I'm going to try to be done within about 30, 35 minutes to save ample time. But these are some of the topics I'm going to go through. I'm going to try not to get very scientific, but hopefully, if I'm successful at today's conversation, you will understand the validity around the rumors, the myths, or the narratives, understand how the vaccine was created so quickly. I've created an IT analogy, and again, if I do this successfully, you'll understand completely how the virus works and then how the vaccine works. I'll talk about the 3 vaccines that are available, and then we'll conclude before Q&A about talking about with the conversation around proper masking. I grew up in the church. I'm a believer, and so how dare I not move forward without paying homage to the Most High. So wanted to share a scripture, Hosea 4:6, one of my favorite scriptures, and I think it's germane to today's conversation, that says, "My people are destroyed because of the lack of knowledge, because you have rejected the knowledge." Our very first case in this country happened on February 1st in the state of Washington. One case, I'm not sure that we really thought that we'd be experiencing what we are in this pandemic today, but just 1 month later, we had over 5,000 cases, and every single state in the US had a documented case of COVID. And then we peaked in mid-April as a country, and this graph shows the number of deaths per month. And then we began to sort of bend and flatten the curve, if you will. So we had several months where things settled down a bit throughout the country. And then, just as we suspected, after Halloween, Hanukkah, Christmas, New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, Three Kings Day, we knew that would result in family gathering, which meant that masks weren't being worn, social distance was not complied with. I'm sure hand hygiene continued, but nonetheless, again, as we predicted, we saw surge 2 of the pandemic in this country. The bad news about what we've experienced is that the year 2020 is going to go down in history as the most deadly year we have ever recorded in the history of the United States of America. And as if that wasn't bad enough, the month of January in 2021 is going to go down in history as the most deadly month ever recorded in the history of America. So not good news. And I don't need to remind you that every single day in America, some 3,000 to 4,000 people die from this virus. So what better time to have a conversation to ensure that we all know about the virus, but more importantly, since we now have a way to reach herd immunity, that we know about the importance of the vaccine. I am not trying to influence you to get vaccinated, but what I am trying to do, if successful in today's conversation, is to arm you with enough information so that you and your family members can make an intelligent or informed decision on what you should do next. The narratives, the rumors. So first, let me say that I'm very sensitive and completely understand why there's vaccine hesitancy. The most common, I think, conversation is around the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, where the medical staff or the medical space during those days, and that's 1932 to 1972, so do the math, that's 40 years where they knew over 600 African-American men had syphilis. They incited them, if you will, to participate in the research by telling them they would give them free health care. They did not tell them that they had syphilis, nor did they treat them. And at that time, remember, penicillin was a standard treatment for syphilis as early as the 1940s. So we had ample time to address this. I can imagine that the 600 people spread it to at least 600 more people. And then during the northern migration, people moved from the south to the north during those days. And then I can only imagine again that syphilis was taken to cities all over the country because of this experiment. So I get it. When I was in medical school, we heard about the HeLa cells. HeLa cells, which I did not learn in medical school, were called HeLa cells because they were named after Henrietta Lacks. And she was diagnosed with cervical cancer. And to this day, unbeknownst to her and her family, until a few years ago, they have been using Henrietta Lacks' cells in the laboratory for the treatment of research around cancer. So clearly, I understand the hesitancy, but I think now it's time in the midst of a pandemic for us to understand if we're going to subscribe to those or we're going to move on to making a decision. You'll learn in today's conversation that you can't get COVID from the vaccination. There is no microchip planted within the vaccine. It does not cause infertility, does not cause miscarriage, and it does not alter your DNA. You know, the ultimate goal here is to reach what's called herd immunity. So long story short, herd immunity is when a vast majority of a population has an immunity to a particular disease. In this case, we need about 80% of the United States of America or the entire globe to have an immunity to the coronavirus. Now, there's two ways to reach herd immunity. One is through passive exposure. So in other words, just sitting back, doing nothing, and watching how it spreads. It will kill, as we know, 3,000 to 4,000 people a day, but eventually, maybe over 5 to 7 years, we can reach herd immunity. But so many of us will fall to a demise to this virus if we did that or took that route. The other way to reach herd immunity, the most efficient, the quickest, the safest way, in my opinion, to reach herd immunity is through vaccination, hence the subject matter of today's conversation. So the number one narrative that I've heard as I've had multiple conversations around the virus and the vaccine was the speed in which it was produced. So this is called the Operation Warp Speed Initiative. So let's talk about that. This is a very busy slide. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the details, but suffice it to say that on average, you look inside of that red circle, on average, it takes about 73 months or 6 years in this country for a manufacturer to produce a vaccine. So the typical process is you see the legend is on the bottom of the screen, you see the color coordination, but the point is a typical process takes about 73 months or 6 years. They asked the manufacturers to produce this vaccine in 14 months. Fate would have it that it was produced because remember, the very first case you saw on my second slide was in the state of Washington in the month of February. The pandemic really became a pandemic in March. So it is not even March yet. Therefore, it's evident that we had the vaccine available to us in less than 14 months, in less than 12 months. So let me make 3 points and I'll move on to the next slide. Whenever you think about or hear someone questioning the speed in which this vaccine was made, I want you to remember a couple of things. One, they were able to produce this vaccine only because, in a short period of time, only because otherwise it would have taken 6 years and we cannot afford 6 more years of this. only because of an RNA technology that existed. RNA technology in the research lab working on cancer has been present for over 10 years. So that is not new, although it's new to this conversation, because they stopped the RNA process in the cancer research and transitioned over to create a vaccine in the midst of a pandemic. So that's one. They had to have this new technology, which was already available, which is the only reason why Pfizer and then Moderna were able to produce it in such a short order. The second point I want to make is that they produced this vaccine without, and I underscore without, skipping any steps, jeopardizing quality, safety, or efficacy of the vaccine. So let me repeat those two. The only reason why they were able to produce it instead of in 6 years, in less than 12 months, is because they took a new technology called an RNA technology, which you're going to know all about in just a second, and they moved it over to produce a vaccine. Second, they produced it in a short order without jeopardizing quality, safety, efficacy, or skipping any steps that they would normally have to take in a 6-year period. So let's drill down a little bit. I'm going to get just a little scientific, if you will. Stay with me. I was a biology major, a chemistry minor at South Carolina State University. And I tell you, had I known then what I know now, I probably would have gotten straight A's during those days at South Carolina State. I created what I call an IKEA analogy to sort of make a point. So let me go through the analogy very quickly. Imagine my wife sent me to IKEA to buy a table and chairs. For whatever reason, she decided she wanted a new one. On my honey-do list, I had to go to IKEA, successfully buy, she sent me with a picture, this table and chair, bring it home, assemble it so that we can utilize it. So I go to IKEA, I get the cart, I get the box, and I'm heading up to pay for it at the register. And I'm a nosy Virgo, so I open up the box and I see the instruction manual. And I comb through quickly the instruction manual and decide, you know what? It's going to take me days to put this table and chairs together. So by the time I get to the register, I ask the person at the register, can I pay for assembly? And the person at the register says, absolutely. The table costs this amount, assembly costs that amount, your total is X. So I pay that X amount. They then take my box to the back of the store where there's a person back there. Let's call this person the assembler. And all this is going to make sense relevant to the virus and the vaccine in just a second. So the assembler takes my box, combs through the instruction manual, they put out the parts, they get the tools, they put everything together, and then they reel the completed table and chairs back to the center of the store for me to take home. No work that needs to be done. They did it in a couple hours. Everybody's happy. This red circle right there demonstrates everything that happens or illustrates everything that happens inside of IKEA. So remember the red circle. So we've got the box, which had the instruction manual. The assembler did the work to put it together. Everything inside of IKEA is in the red circle. And that's important because I now have to take the completely assembled table and chairs outside of the red box, or outside of IKEA, load it up on a vehicle and drive it home. So the extent you understand that, you should understand this, hopefully. So this is just a different illustration of the same thing we just talked about. The red circle is everything that happens inside of IKEA. The first step is the box, which has the instruction manual, the parts and the tools inside of it. The second step was the box went to the assembler in the back of the store who read the instruction manual, gathered the tools, the parts, and assembled it, brought it back to the front of the store. And then I took the assembled kitchen table and chairs outside of the red circle, outside of IKEA, loaded up on a vehicle and took it home. So to the extent you got that, let's move on to something different. So again, there's the box, there's the assembler, and that's the completed product outside of IKEA. Now let's call that box now DNA, because DNA, you get half from your mother, half from your father. That is your instruction manual inside of all of your cells. So now that red circle represents a cell. Inside of all of your cells, you have DNA. And the DNA is genetic code that you got from your mom and your dad that tells the cell what to do. The assembler inside of the cell is RNA. So the RNA is the thing inside the cell that does the work. So your genetic code says, make another strand of hair this color. Your RNA reads the DNA like the assembler in the store, and it makes a strand of hair, and then you grow hair on the top of your head or under your underarms or different parts of your body. So that is what the RNA does. So the DNA is the box, the instruction manual, which is the genetic code. The RNA is the equivalent to the person in the back of the store putting it together. And then the final product, after the cell produces, it is either dumped into your blood or it leaves the body in the sense of hair, so that it can do the role that your parents' genetic code that you now have inside of you instructs it to do. So to the extent you understand that, let's get a little more scientific, but more specific to the coronavirus. So top left of your screen, it's the illustration that you've seen a million times of the coronavirus. It's a circular object that has arm extensions, if you will, extending from it. And the top of the extension, there's like a hand. So we call that your spike protein. So you see all the other parts. I'm only going to draw your attention to two of them. That's the spike protein. So let's imagine the spike protein is an arm that has a hand on top. And then inside, if we open up the coronavirus, we don't care about the DNA, although we know it's in there. The coronavirus has an RNA. So let's talk about, now that we have this red circle, it represents one of your human cells. You know, you have your own DNA, you have your own RNA, and then it produces something outside of the red circle. So let's suppose Mrs. Jones was getting on an elevator. She gets on an elevator and her cell phone rings. She takes her mask off because she thinks it's okay because she's alone. She speaks on the phone. Let's say she was in a heated argument and she has pressured speech. So she's releasing into the air saliva. If Mrs. Jones happened to be infected, whether she knows it or not, by the coronavirus, she has now released the coronavirus into the air. So Mrs. Jones then completes her phone call. She puts her mask back on. She exits the elevator, and then someone else gets on the elevator. All they saw was Mrs. Jones getting off with her mask on and did not appreciate the fact that she'd taken her mask off or that she has coronavirus. So the next person gets on, let's say their phone rings, they take their mask off, they are coronavirus negative. But now, since Mrs. Jones released it into the air, this person inhales, because it's airborne, they inhale the virus. Keep in mind, the most common mode of transmission of the virus, because it's an airborne virus, we know a lot more now than we knew at the beginning of the pandemic. The most common way it gets into your body is through your nose or through your mouth. Hence, the mask covers up your nose and your mouth. So let's say this person got on the elevator and they took their mask off, they had a phone call, and they inhaled a coronavirus. The coronavirus is now, once it gets inside of their nose or their mouth, it now is going to use its spike protein. So this is how the virus works, ladies and gentlemen. So the spike protein, remember, it's equivalent to an arm with a hand. The spike protein grabs onto one of your human cells. It punches holes in your human cell so they can do one thing: deposit its RNA into your human cell. So it's going to deposit the entire RNA into the human cell. So since you know what RNA does, it assembles whatever the genetic code tells it to, which is the DNA or the box in the analogy from IKEA. Once that coronavirus grabs onto your human cells, punches holes, and deposits its RNA, that coronavirus RNA, not yours, is going to produce what? Another coronavirus. So that's how the coronavirus works. It gets access to a human cell through your nose or your mouth. It grabs onto your human cells with its spike proteins, punches holes, deposits its RNA. Its RNA is an assembler, just like yours, and what it makes 100% of the time is what? Another coronavirus. Now you go from one coronavirus to two, 2 to 4, 4 to 8, 8 to 16, and now you have coronaviruses throughout your body. If the coronavirus viruses take over the cells responsible for your smell, you lose your smell. Your taste, you lose your taste. In your lungs, it's going to take over your lungs. You can't exchange oxygen. You're going to need a ventilator. And those are the 3,000 to 4,000 people every single day that don't do well. That's how the coronavirus works. Now, let's take one more scientific step and then we can go on to something much more light. How does the vaccine work? Now remember, I explained to you guys or reminded you that the very first step that a coronavirus takes to infect a human cell or to hijack a human cell is to take its spike proteins and to grab onto one of your human cells. So that's what it's doing. It's grabbing onto one of your human cells to punch holes. First step, it grabs onto one of your human cells after you inhale it or ingest the virus. So scientists said, remember that RNA technology? Scientists said, how about we use the RNA technology that's been around for 10 years or more, stop working on cancer, let's shift over to work on a vaccine. They said, great idea, Operation Warp Speed. So the question then became, well, where should we focus on for the vaccine? What step in everything we just went through on the previous slide? And they said, well, let's just stop the first step. In other words, let's stop the spike protein from attaching to a human cell, punching holes and depositing the RNA. So that's what they decided to do. So the very first thing they did was they isolated or extracted a coronavirus from an infected person. They took it to the laboratory. They opened it up, and then they decided they were going to focus on the spike protein. They took the entire RNA, that squiggly line that you saw, that represents the entire coronavirus, and then they were able to understand within that RNA what part of the RNA is only responsible for, now I need you to get this, what part of the RNA is only responsible for the spike protein. They isolated that one part, they threw everything else away, and now they have the RNA from the coronavirus that's responsible for assembling a spike protein. They took that piece of RNA, they put it in the form of a vaccine, and they inject it into the human. Why do they do that? Because once they inject the RNA into the human cell, and you know, typically it's one of the muscle cells, human cells, that RNA is going to become active. It's inside of your cell, it uses your energy. And because it's not the whole coronavirus RNA, but instead only the spike protein RNA, your cells inside of your cell is only going to produce a spike protein. So this is why you can't get coronavirus from the vaccine, because the RNA injected inside of you is only RNA from the coronavirus with spike protein. So now you're producing one spike protein, two spike proteins, 4, 8, 16, 32. Now you have a bloodstream full of spike protein. Your brain says that is a foreign body, so we should produce antibodies to the spike protein. So then you produce antibodies to the spike protein. So now you have a blood full of deactivated spike proteins that you get rid of, and remaining are just the antibodies to the spike protein. So that in the event, once you have been vaccinated, if you're exposed to, get on the elevator after Mrs. Jones, who has put the coronavirus in the air, if you're exposed to it for whatever reason, once that coronavirus tries to attach to your cell, that's the very first step, remember, on how it infects you. You have antibodies in your blood that when it goes to attach, the antibodies say stop. You cannot attach to the cell. And then the coronavirus eventually just dies. That's called immunity. If 80% of us get to that point, that's called herd immunity. The last thing I'm gonna say about this slide is notice the one-way street from DNA to RNA to protein. Because we're injecting RNA inside of the human body, it does not go the opposite direction. So it always goes from RNA to a protein. So it cannot go in the reverse direction and impact your DNA. So the suggestion that you can get coronavirus or it alters your DNA is not true at all. All right, let me just transition just a bit to talk about the differences between the three viruses. I've got a few more slides after that, and then we'll go into Q&A. So my prayer is that you understood how the virus works. You understand now how the coronavirus works. We've addressed most of the myths. I've got a couple more to go, but let's jump into the viruses. So Pfizer applied for emergency use authorization first. They use, and let me orient you this slide. First column, manufacturer and the characteristics of the vaccine. Second column is the manufacturer Pfizer and its characteristics. Third is Moderna and its characteristics. Johnson & Johnson just applied for emergency use authorization. We're waiting any day to see if they get it, which I'm sure they will. then we'll have a third. And then shortly after that, we think AstraZeneca is going to apply. So let's just talk about each of them. So Pfizer, as you see, it's an RNA-based vaccine. You get 2 injections, 21 days apart. The efficacy is 95%. That means that of every 100 people that are injected with Pfizer, that are vaccinated with Pfizer, 95 of the 100, or 95% per 100, 95% of them will have immunity. 5% won't have immunity. So we just hope and pray we're not that 5%. But if you are, have no fear, because 100% of the people who receive Pfizer or Moderna will never get so sick, even if they get the virus, that they need to be hospitalized. So that's one point to take home. And the second is, if you're in that 5%, you will not die from coronavirus. So therefore, it has a 90% efficacy, or it's effective for 95% of the people, but the 5% may get some symptoms, maybe, but they won't get coronavirus so bad that they have to be hospitalized, nor will they die. Moderna, quickly, it's 2 injections, 28 days apart. The efficacy is almost the same. Johnson & Johnson is going to be different. I believe they're going to be approved for 1 injection, and you see the efficacy is anywhere between 72 and 85%. And you get the full effect after 28 days. AstraZeneca is going to be 2 shots, 30 days apart, and the efficacy will probably be around 90%. At the bottom in the green, I just wanted to remind you that outside of the RNA technology, none of this is new. The flu vaccine that I got in October, it's a live inactivated virus. They take a live virus, they deactivate it, and then they inject it inside of you. So Pfizer, Moderna, you see up top, is RNA based. Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca, they do use the RNA technology, but they take an adenovirus, which causes the common cold. They deactivate it, they add the RNA to that, and then they inject that into you. So that's a little bit of a difference. Measles, mumps, and rubella. You got 2 shots, 28 days apart, just like Moderna, and then look at the efficacy. The flu vaccine is only 50%. I mean, we're talking about all of these are much greater than 50% effective. And measles, mumps, and rubella, 97%. So again, this is outside the RNA technology. You've seen things just like this, and you've participated in the vaccine initiative in the past. I think most of the people in the audience have at least had measles, mumps, and rubella. Very quickly, people always ask me, well, especially people of color, well, how many Black people were engaged, and what was the breakdown of the participants in the research? 50% were female, almost 10% were Black, over 25% were from the Latinx community. The average age was 51. And yes, although we said at the beginning of the pandemic, if you're obese, you have diabetes or lung disease, you're guaranteed to die from this virus. They included 35% of the people had obesity, almost 9% had diabetes, and almost 8% had known lung disease, and none of them died or had to be hospitalized once they were vaccinated. I also, this is a Pfizer again, I'm just picking on Pfizer because they were first. 95% efficacy, you know that. But people always ask, well, what's the breakdown in efficacy for certain demographics? Well, 100% efficacy if you're African American, and 94.4% efficacy if you're from the Latinx community. So I just thought I'd highlight those because a lot of the hesitancy is coming from those 2 communities. You know, we've had this conversation multiple times across the country, and this is a picture of me just to prove that not only am I talking the talk, but I'm walking the walk, if you will. So on December 21st, the picture to the left was me receiving my first Pfizer injection. And then on 21 days later, I received my second Pfizer injection as well. I'd be happy to answer questions about my side effects. They were very minimal, but there are some rules to sort of take home with you. These are the 7 most common side effects. But a couple things here. If you're 55 years old or above, you should expect to have very few side effects. If you're 54 or younger, you will likely get some of these. But the good news is, regardless of the side effects you get, they should be resolved within 24 hours. The vast majority of the side effects are gone within 24 hours. You may be thinking, okay, well, I'm gonna just, take some Motrin or Tylenol before I get vaccinated. Don't do that, because you need your body to develop an immunity. In fact, it's a good thing to have side effects, because the side effects mean that the injection is working, that your body is creating an immune response to that RNA portion of the coronavirus that produces the spike protein. So I was hoping and praying, literally, I hoped and prayed that I had side effects. All I had was soreness on my left arm, and I had a headache. I took some Tylenol 24 hours after that, or a few hours, I should say, after that. Don't take Motrin. You can take Tylenol. Motrin, it blunts your immunity because it's an anti-inflammatory drug, and there's an inflammatory component to you creating an immunity to the vaccine. So stay away from the Motrin. If you need to take Tylenol, take it. But regardless, all your side effect symptoms should be gone within 24 hours. Once you're vaccinated, you must still wear a mask, you must still social distance, and you should still avoid crowds until when? Until we hear people like Dr. Fauci say, the United States of America or the entire planet has reached herd immunity. This side, the slide reminds you on the left that coronavirus enters into your cells so that its spike proteins can grab onto your human cells and punch holes to deposit RNA through your nose and your mouth. That's it. That's how you get coronavirus, through your nose and your mouth. The right side reminds you that because it goes through your nose and your mouth, it has access to your lungs, and that's how people get in trouble. There's something called a 6-inch test that you can do in the event that you want to make sure that the mask that you're wearing is working. You take a candle, hold it 6 inches in front of you, and you try to blow out the candle. To the extent where you can blow the candle out or significantly move the flame, that suggests that your mask should be replaced. And that's important because oftentimes we like to wear designer masks. I see Gucci, Louis, colleges. I see all kinds of masks when I'm in public. And I always ask myself, would that mask pass the 6-inch whiff test? Very quickly, because I know we're going to get to Q&A soon, I just want to just draw your attention to these 5 people that are not properly wearing your mask. And the reason why I'm bringing that point forward is because if you don't wear your mask properly, it's as if you are not wearing a mask at all, and you may as well take it off. And I mean that sarcastically, but I mean that. So look at the first person. Her nose is exposed. You know that the most common way to get coronavirus is through your nose or your mouth. So she left it open. You may as well take it off. The number 2 person, his chin, his mask is not pulled below his chin. When your mask is not pulled below your chin, you see what happens. You see this reporter's mask doesn't cover her chin, therefore it creates gaps on the side of her mask. The coronavirus, which is invisible, it's microscopically invisible, it can seep through the sides of the mask and has access directly to your nose and your mouth. And then the third person has gaps on the side of her mask. Just like this person, there are gaps on the side. The fourth person has gaps on the side of the nose. That means that the coronavirus can seep in through the side of the mask on the side of the bridge of your nose and get access to it. And then this 5th person is wearing the mask as if it's a turtleneck, so she may as well take it off. The last person is wearing the mask properly, and also the mask is either medical grade or the mask is multi-layered. So you need to make sure that at least your mask is multi-layered if it's not considered to be medical grade. That is all I have in terms of a presentation. And let's get down to the conversation. This is the most important part of the presentation. So I will now yield my microphone to Deanne. Deanne?
Wow, that's all I can say. Thank you. That was so informative. I mean, oh my gosh, like I learned so much in the last 30 something minutes. I don't even know what to do. So thank you for that. I think everyone is saying the same thing. I'm seeing some of the chats with that. So I do have someone on the panel right now, participating tonight, who just got their first dose. And so they want to know if both doses of the Moderna vaccine are identical, and then how long will they be protected after the second dose takes full effect?
All
So
right, great question.
his first dose, doctor, was February 12th, and his second dose will be March 12th.
Okay, so first of all, let me say, I'm assuming it's a he, I believe you said. So let me say congratulations to you. Sorry. So congratulations that you rolled your sleeve up and got vaccinated, because you're getting us closer to herd immunity. Moderna, remember, RNA-based, first shot, 28 days later, second shot. So here's the science. After your first shot, you really do get some degree of an immunity. So let's say and it varies with individual and circumstance, but let's say it's about 50% immune. So after about a week to 10 days, you should feel comfortable knowing that you have some degree of immunity. But after your second shot and you wait another week to 10 days to be on the safe side, 14 days, then now you're at that 95% immunity and you should be proud of yourself. But you got to be careful because you still need to wear a mask and you still need to social distance, because what we don't know is if you can serve as a carrier just because you're immune. Remember, the virus gets inside of your nose. It's steadily trying to attach. It's difficult for it to attach. I get it. But you may then sneeze, put it right back in the air and give it to someone else. So that's one. Two, let's talk about the variants. The difference between this virus today and this so-called UK or South African variant or mutation is that it's easier for the spike proteins to grab onto your cell. It grabs on even harder, and it's easier for it to get inside of someone's nose and attach to the cell. So we talk about the infectivity or the spreadability of this new virus. The good news is that current Moderna and Pfizer protect you from the new variants. But the bad news is if we don't hurry up and reach herd immunity, eventually our current immunizations, our current vaccines will not fight off the new variant. And we may be starting this pandemic all over again. You and I don't want that. I can't wait till you get your second shot. You are going to feel so much of a weight lifted off of your chest. And again, thank you for rolling up your sleeve and getting us as a country closer to herd immunity. Next question.
Yes. So this question is, want to know which of the vaccines is most potent? Is there a preference to use in the geriatric population?
Yeah, so if you remember the slide I showed, I didn't say this, but the average age in both Moderna and Pfizer studies was 51, but a large percentage, a material amount of the participants were seniors. Because they're both based on RNA, the only real difference between Pfizer and Moderna, and thank you for that question, is one has to be stored in a very low temperature freezer. The other, a household temperature freezer. And that's because of solutions that they constructed them in. Outside of that, they're essentially the same. I say to you, just get in line, whatever one they have available, because they're equally potent. One's 94.5, one's 95% effective. So let's just say that they're the same effectiveness, they're the same technology. Just get whatever you can as quickly as possible. I got Pfizer, my wife got Moderna, and we're both, hopefully I don't look weird to you, but I look just as weird as I did prior to the vaccines. Our side effects were very minimal. And again, I feel so good that I, one, pushed us closer to herd immunity, and two, I don't have to worry about getting so sick. If I'm in that 5%, getting so sick I need to be hospitalized, nor do I have to worry about dying from coronavirus.
Okay, so if you had the virus and you lived from it, how are you now immune for the virus for a while?
Oh, that's another great question. This is an amazing question. This is a very bright audience. So great question. So thank you for that. So here's what we know. You probably heard that, and hopefully you guys understood the analogies with the IKEA and how the virus works and how the vaccine works. Because if you didn't, let me know what part you don't understand. I got to go back through it, because now you know, when you watch whatever news you watch and you read articles on the corona, when the physicians or the researchers or the scientists use these fancy words, now you know, and you can give the same presentation yourself, exactly what you're talking about. All right, so let me answer the question. Can you repeat the question, Deanne? I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem.
Sorry about that.
It was like, if you had
I
the
get
virus,
so excited.
I
when I
know,
talk
but
about
we're
this.
like loving it. I'm like, I just want you to keep talking. So if you had the virus and you lived from it, are you now immune for a while?
Thank you. Okay, so you probably heard that people got coronavirus a second, and now we're hearing people getting it a third time. That is because although you create your own antibodies to it, you do have an immunity. The immunity doesn't last forever. So eventually your antibodies will weaken, they'll decrease in number. So just because you've had coronavirus does not mean you should not get vaccinated. Now, I must also be open and honest and truthful, because I always will be, I promise. We also don't know, once you're vaccinated, how long your immunity will last. The reason why I have to get a flu vaccine every single year is because when I get the injection of the virus and I create antibodies to the flu before flu season, they die off before the next flu season comes. So you have to get another one. Versus measles, mumps, and rubella, that was at the bottom of that slide, those antibodies last forever. We don't know how long these antibodies are going to last, but let's pray and be optimistic that they last forever. If not, we'll be getting a shot every year. And my prayer then will be, why don't you just combine the flu vaccine with the corona vaccine? Give me that one shot every year, and I'm good to go. Next question.
Okay. All right. We're getting some really good questions. The next one is, what are your thoughts in regard to the monococcal, the infusion? I'm not saying the right word.
Yes,
For
great.
someone who is diagnosed with COVID, someone in their family was just received it today.
So listen, that is the so-called Trump cocktail. We actually had before we started today's discussion, Roxanne and I had a conversation, and we talked about that. Listen, if you qualify for the monoclonal antibody, you need to ask for it. As a matter of fact, if you or any of your family members, and I'm not going to get political and I'm not going to talk about systemic racism here, but if you or any of your family members, regardless of your demographic, have to go to a hospital for coronavirus, first of all, there's a certain number of days by which you qualify to receive the monoclonal antibody. So you need to go immediately if you think that you're getting sick. Number two, when you get there, your chief complaint should be something like, I think I have corona, and say it with security. I think I have coronavirus and I want the monoclonal antibody. The same thing Trump had. Say that and make them tell you you can't have it, but don't accept that answer until you're convinced that you don't qualify for it. But the key is you got to go early enough, and absolutely I promote it. That is a life-saving intervention in most cases, and we should all, as Americans, have access to it, equally have access to it.
Oh, yeah, equity. That's what we want.
That's right.
Okay. Someone wants to know if they take Motrin every day for residual pain. Should they stop it prior to getting the vaccine? And if so, how many days beforehand should they stay off of Motrin?
Great. These are, and I'm not kidding you. I've spoken to over 50,000, and I don't know how many people are on today, but whatever that number is, people. And the questions have never been this interesting and intelligent. Hopefully, it's a reflection of the presentation we gave earlier. I would say stop the Motrin about 2 days prior. Switch over to Tylenol. It's not as good. I don't know what you're treating, but Motrin is an anti-inflammatory. Tylenol is not. It's only really good for, and I'm not bad-mouthing Tylenol, it's only really good for fever and some pain, but not inflammation. So stop a couple days early, switch over to Tylenol. You can take that every 4 to 6 hours, and then and however you need to take it. But then about 24 hours or at least 12 hours after you receive your vaccine, you can go back to the Motrin if you need to. One more thing. I would also invite you to research. So I take every single day. You remember the cod liver oil our parents used to give us back in the 60s and 70s? Well, I don't do cod because that's a scavenger and not necessarily a clean fish. But I do fish oil, or you can do flaxseed oil. In fact, men should do flaxseed, women can do either. But that is a natural anti-inflammatory. I've got chronic lumbar arthritis, and I don't have to take Motrin every day because I take fish oil or flaxseed oil every single day. I take the capsules, I do flaxseed seeds, and when I make my smoothies and things of that nature. So I think it's time for us to, and maybe this is a different conversation, Deanne and Roxanne, I'll be happy to come back and talk about this, but I believe
we'll pick you up on that. So
let's do it. I believe there's a spiritual, there's a biblical, if you look at Leviticus and Deuteronomy, those are instructions on what we should and should not eat. So we're all going to die, but we can live a longer and healthier life if we follow the biblical instructions. You don't need to go and read it. I'll interpret it for you, and we can do that in another conversation.
Oh, I love it. Okay, especially as we're going into the Lent season. Is it possible to take all the necessary precautions and still be diagnosed with COVID? I think you kind of touched on that, but just want to make that clear.
You know, so we were having a conversation earlier, and I won't get into details, but someone was saying that their son-in-law He follows all the rules except he double masks, but he goes out to the supermarket on occasion, things of that nature, and he still got it. So what we do, so the answer is yes, but it's probably something simple like you weren't wearing your mask properly, or remember it's airborne. So you have to think, now that you know it's airborne, it's airborne. If you walk in front of some air that has the coronavirus floating in it, gravity will knock it to the floor eventually. But think about it, it's on your mask. Now, what you do with your mask can determine. If you grab your mask by the front and pull it off and put it wherever you put it, or when you grab it to put it back on, if you have the coronavirus on your fingers, because remember, you learned early on in the pandemic, it can live for a number of hours and before it dies, and it will die, it will stay alive only if it has access to a human cell. So that's how it stays alive. So you can infect yourself by touching your nose, putting your fingers in your mouth, things of that nature. So we have to be real careful about, even though the mask is protective, it's on the virus potentially is on the outside of your mask. And that's a way I think that we don't think about often on how one can become infected, even though they comply with the masking, social distancing, et cetera.
Okay, great. Yeah. So taking both shots, how long will you be a person who probably spread to others? So if you took the shots, how long will it take so you're not spreading, I guess is what they're asking.
So the science has not completely, this is yet another brilliant question. The science hasn't yet completely answered that question. We're starting to think, based on the research that's being published and all of my readings, that it does prevent you from spreading it, but we're not 100% sure. We think it at least decreases it. But I think it's safe to assume, in the analogy that I gave, that when you walk on the elevator after Mrs. Jones released it into the air, even if you've been vaccinated, you waited 14 days, if it gets inside of your nose or your mouth and tries to attach to a cell, it won't be successful because you're immunized. However, if you then sneeze or sing or spit inadvertently and you put it back in the air, someone else can get infected. So that's what we think. And until proven otherwise, I think that's the guidance we should follow.
Okay, so we have a few questions around the mask. So I'm going to pivot to that and then come back about the vaccine in a minute. Okay.
Yes.
So one of them is, how long will an N95 mask last on average, and how do you properly care for one?
Listen, I know I keep saying this, and I am not just trying to, pull. I'm not blowing smoke. These questions are amazing. So I try to avoid answering that question because N95 masks, depending upon the manufacturer, they were massively produced, and I don't know the quality of them. But suffice it to say, you need to look at your mask on occasion, because remember, if you're working from home and you don't go outside, you wear your mask much less than someone like me who goes to work every single day, almost 6 or 7 days a week, and I have to wear a mask. I have to wear a mask all day long. So I look at my mask periodically. I grab it by the strings. I look at the outside of it to see, when I see evidence of some type of abrasion on the mask, then I throw it away and replace it because I want it to look new as possible. The more abrasion or, let's say, fuzziness you see on your mask, that means that there are pores inside it and the coronavirus can go right through it and have access to your nose and your mouth attached to the cell punch holes and deposit its RNA. So it's hard for me to answer that question. Cloth masks, you need to wash them if they're washable and you continue to wear them, but every time you wash it, you're creating pores. So I think a visual assessment of the mask is the best advice I can give you. The manufacturers should give you some instructions on when to replace the mask, but then nowadays, because they're massively produced, they may not be doing that or not. So that's the best comfortable answer I'll give.
Okay, and someone wanted to know, can you spray the mask with disinfectant to kill the virus?
Yeah, so that's very interesting. That's a great question. I would not spray directly on the mask, but indirectly, if you lifted the mask and at a distance, sprayed into the air and allowed the vapors from the mist to get on the mask, I think that's a good idea. But my preference would be, if you think you need to disinfect the mask, ask yourself first, is it time to replace it? If you decide that it's not, then I think that's a smart thing to do.
Okay. And then what do you know of any effect or side effects from us wearing these masks all day? Because we're breathing in what we're breathing out. So is there any long-term effects to that?
My answer would be no, not that I know of. So I'm an asthmatic. You may hear me wheezing occasionally. I'm an asthmatic. By the way, I have a history of anaphylactic reactions. If anyone wants to ask about an allergic reaction, I'm that guy who is allergic to shellfish, etc. Who people are worried if you have that past medical history, and I'll talk about that in just a second. So let me make sure I remember the question. So um,
Long-term effects about
Lots of,
wearing the mask,
yes. So I
breathing.
don't know of any. When you get into the designer mask with different colors, those are chemicals that make the color. So you should consider that. I personally have gone on Amazon and bought K95s and N95s, and I either get the medical color, which is that light blue, a white, which is a hypoallergic if I can find those because I've got seasonal allergies, or I'll just get a black because black is like a neutral color if for some reason I want to look to some degree fashionable. I don't do the designer masks. I just don't know enough about them, about the manufacturing of it. Neither do I do those turtleneck, elastic, whatever those things are called. I'm not saying they don't work, but this is a coronavirus, and while they look good and look comfortable, I want to have a snug fit. I have traveled since the pandemic on a couple of occasions because I had to, and I double mask. This is way before the double mask conversation started. I would take my N95 mask and put it on top of my medical grade mask. As soon as I step into the airport, I'm double masking. When I get out of the airport into an Uber or into my car, then I'll single mask again. But that uncomfortable, tight feeling, although it annoys the heck out of me, it assures me that I'm less likely to get the virus from a bunch of strangers on a plane. Although it's great filtration down the airplanes, the risk is the risk. And so I don't understand why people take their masks off or don't double mask. I advise that you consider that. I advise that you consider that if you have to travel or there's a high risk environment.
Okay.
I saw something pop up about, and I don't want to forget. I saw something
Yes.
pop up about vitamin D. Can I address that quickly?
Yes, yes. How helpful are vitamin D and C?
All right. So now everything I'm saying, unless I said it's my opinion, is scientific fact. So I just want you to know that. So I take a blood pressure medication every single morning. So that's that. I take my flaxseed capsule every single day, every single morning. So that's that. Since the pandemic started, I take a couple more things. Let me tell you what they are. I take vitamin D, scientifically proven to mitigate the ability of the virus's spike protein to punch holes, attach punch holes in the positive RNA. That's one. Two, vitamin D is really a hormone. It also has anti-inflammatory properties to it as well. So I take vitamin D every single day. If you ask me the doses, I'm not going to give it to you. You just have to do your Google because I just have to be careful not to establish a patient-physician relationship. The other thing I take is melatonin. Melatonin first of all, it's a natural substance. You produce it and your brain produces it. It represents in Egypt the pineal gland that you saw in some of the large statues. So the pineal gland has a relationship with melatonin. It has a side effect of making you sleepy, some of us anyway. So I take it at bedtime. That is a scientifically proven means of reducing or mitigating that whole process from taking place. I also take a multivitamin as well, which has the 100% the recommended daily amount of vitamin C. The only problem with that, vitamin C, is an antiviral, antibacterial. It boosts your immune system. The only problem with vitamin C, vitamins E, A, D, and K are fat soluble, meaning that if you take too much or you take more than you need at that time, you store it so you can tap into it later. You can also overdose on it versus water soluble vitamins. All the other vitamins are water soluble. So if you take vitamin C right now, after your body uses what it needs, you urinate it out, and that's why your urine turns colors. If you take multivitamins, the water soluble vitamins you urinate out. So vitamin C, it's good to take that throughout the day as best you can. The last thing I take, and this is only during the pandemic, I don't want you thinking that I'm shoving a bunch of stuff in my mouth. I don't typically do that. I try to do things naturally. Zinc. Zinc is also known to prevent all of that from happening. And Zicam is what I started off taking. You can't really find I was unable to find Zicam after a period. They sold out everywhere. By the way, Zicam, the Z stands for zinc, the ICAM, and this is biochemistry now, ICAM, Zicam, is the receptor that the viruses attach onto. They attach onto it receptors. It's called an ICAM. So zinc, Zicam is why they call it Zicam. Zinc makes it hard for it to attach to the receptor. I mean, you guys are ready for medical school. You know more than, you know just as much as Dr. Fauci after this conversation. I pray to God that it makes sense to you and you're comprehending.
Oh my God, we need you to replace Dr. Fauci. You make more sense. So we had a couple of questions about that. Just getting back to the mask for a second, because a couple of people want to know, we're tennis players. I know I personally have a daughter who plays indoor tennis right now, and she has to wear a mask the whole time. But somebody else wants to know, how are the masks impacting breathing and the lungs as we're wearing them when we're doing this kind of exercise?
Okay, great question. So I'm thinking about this out loud. So this is my opinion. I've never been, you guys are blowing me away with these questions. Jeez. So here's what I was saying. And this is anecdotal. This is Reggie Eadie's opinion, not factual. So first of all, tennis is, it's a full body workout like swimming to me, including the brain, which is why I'm not a tennis player. So we have to make sure that something like a K95 or N95, I do not advise why you're playing tennis, because you need the oxygen exchange as much as possible. Now, could someone take their mask off theoretically? Theoretically, could you take your mask off while you're playing tennis? Only if you believe that there's no airborne virus, which means that if the indoor tennis court, hopefully it's the right nomenclature, was closed for 8 hours overnight, you walked in and you or your child was the first person to get in that section, then I think it's fair to believe that any virus that's been there over 8 hours should be on the ground. So, but I'm not advising that, but I'm just saying in the event there's an extreme circumstance. Other than that, I'd wear a medical grade mask, or I think this may be a good idea where you have those elastic, I'm not sure what those are called, Deanne, but those pull-up masks so that you have good air exchange.
Yeah, they're called gator masks. Yeah.
Yes, those. So, however, as soon as that tennis match or whatever you guys call it is over, then I would automatically have that person. And I loved when a tennis play, after you guys score a point, you walk away. You always walk away and do something. Sometimes you go to the side bench, drink some water. If you go back to an area that's occupied by humans, you need to switch that mask out very quickly. And then if you get to a higher risk level, then that's when you double mask. But of course, not while you're playing tennis is my recommendation. You need to have the ability to exchange air. A medical grade mask, which you can buy on Amazon, they're not that expensive anymore, should suffice. And I would only take my mask off if you're 100% sure that there's no coronavirus in the air. If you're outside, then it decreases that chance. If you're in a closed environment, it increases the chance that there's still coronavirus in the air. Then the ventilation and open windows and open doors make a difference at that point.
Okay. And it's 7 o'clock, but we have a few more questions. Is it okay for me to ask?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. So the doctors are saying that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine will cause more side effects. Should this not be used in older populations?
I don't have an answer to you right now. And the only reason why I don't is because they've not gotten approval. When they get, which I believe they will, and hopefully it'll be soon, when they get emergency use authorization approval, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to print out those 50, 70 pages and I'm going to read them all. And then I'm going to go back into that one slide that I had, the light green with all the vaccines, and I'm going to go and plug in new information. Then I'm going to make a new slide and I'll get back in front of an audience and I can answer that question. But I can only answer that question as a fact once the Federal Drug Administration, the FDA, does their research and approves it. If they don't approve it, and I learn why they didn't approve it, and then they later approve it, then I'll give you the differences there. But until it's approved, I have no idea of the data of the research.
Okay, well, thank you for your honesty on that. And I think one of the last questions that we have here is, when do you think the vaccine is going to be available for children?
Yeah, so first of all, I think that Pfizer, remember Pfizer got approved for 16 and above. Moderna 18 and above. I think they already had kids in the research. They probably just did not have a lot of them. AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson are also researching kids. I know because the typical death in America from the coronavirus was someone around 45 or older. They didn't waste their time trying to include people much younger in the research. Once they got approved for that, then they'll go back and say, now let's pull in younger people. And you probably saw, I watched CNN and MSNBC, you probably saw that there are like 6-year-old kids now getting Moderna, Pfizer, and Johnson & Johnson. So it's just a matter of time. My guess is that by the end of the summer, the fall, they'll have, or sooner, they'll have kids, humans of all ages can get vaccinated.
Okay. All right. Well, a mother of 4. I can't wait for that. So I have 2 more that I want to ask before we end tonight. One is, what are your thoughts on power walking outside without people around wearing masks?
Yeah. So, I struggle with, and back in the 70s and 80s, we could go up to someone and say, excuse me, you probably need to put your mask on. Today, you can't do that. So I would avoid them. And I'm not saying you do this, but it's just my personality. I try to demonstrate some degree of frustration by directing my attention to them and moving out of the way just to make a point. But let me answer your question. I think that's a problem because if they have the virus, remember, almost 50%, up to 50% of the people today with the virus are asymptomatic, meaning they're not sick. They have no idea they have the virus. That we have been around people, whether we know it or not, who were infected by the virus, period. Therefore, I would stay the heck away from probably that outdoor walking area. I would also get legislators involved so policy can be put in place that mandates that people wear these doggone masks. I mean, we're not talking about a cold here. We're talking about 3,000 to 4,000 people a day, not a year, dying. We're talking about the most deadly year 2020 we've ever seen in our life. We're talking about the most deadly month, January 2021, we've ever seen in the history of America. So something needs to be done, and people need to advocate for each other and one another. And like Lester Holt says, we've got to take care of ourselves and take care of each other. People who are doing that are not only irresponsible, but it's hard to convince me that they love themselves and they love each other. And they love others, I should say. So it drives me crazy. You can probably hear it in my voice when people have no regard for what the heck is going on. And oftentimes it's politically driven. It's, whatever you believe, what we've seen 4 years of I don't want to get political. We've seen people who just didn't think right. We've seen leaders who said, you don't have to wear a mask. But they have access to these fancy drugs that keep them alive, when the brown and black communities or the vulnerable communities that were marginalized because of things like systemic racism, we start off not having a good chance. And it's a wonder hotspots are the same areas in this country. I'm being tangential. But if you look at the hotspots in this country, it's the same so-called ghettos that redlining, the Highway Act of 1956 and things of that nature. That systemic process created an environment whereby when the pandemic comes around, it's no wonder brown and black lives are being lost disproportionately. And we do the best we can as a people to comply. I'll stop there. I think that answered the question.
Yes. Well, thank you, because I could talk all day on things like that too. I'm all into that social justice right now as well. A person wants to know if the clear plastic shields are effective at all.
Yeah, so they are effective. However, it is not common that you get the virus through your cells in your eyes. Now, so people go extra above and beyond, extra caution. They wear the facial shields. I don't have a problem with that. I don't wear glasses, I don't wear contacts, and I don't wear a facial shield because I'm comfortable that 99.99% of the infections happen through the nose and the mouth. Now, if I had a corneal abrasion or just had some type of eye surgery and there's exposure of my cells at my eye because of that injury or post-surgical condition, then I would wear a shield. But I feel comfortable not doing so because of that.
Okay, great. And the last question, do you have any science behind like exactly how long the virus lives?
Yeah, so there's a lot of literature out there, and I don't talk about that anymore. I used to have a slide on it, but I had a slide that used to say if it's on a wooden surface like a floor or furniture versus something metal like a door handle or something plastic or rubber like your computer laptop keys, they have different, based on the science and the research, they have different life expectancies on different surfaces. I don't talk about that anymore because you don't see people wiping everything down like they used to. You don't see hand sanitizer everywhere like you used to see it because we know that it's airborne and we're less concerned about it sitting on the surface. It will last for hours, but I don't think we need to worry about it lasting for days. To the extent where you're not comfortable, the only time I really wipe down now is when I get on an airplane. So I bring my own wipes, plus they give you little small wipes, and I will hold up the plane until I wipe everything that I think I'm going to touch down. And then I take my time, and I'm double masked. I take my time, sit down, and I'm comfortable with it. But suffice it to say that that information is out there. I don't talk about it anymore. I think it's more important to know that it's airborne. And when you get that it's airborne, you start thinking differently. When you're interacting with people because you're walking on a walking trail or a biking trail, you know that it's airborne. So you get to judge, you can make decisions based on the information that we talked about today. Let me say one more thing. Where did the 6 feet social distancing come from? The research shows that once the virus becomes airborne, it can travel up to 6 feet in distance before it completely falls down. 6 feet in distance. So that's why we say social distancing should at least be, not up to, it says at least be. So 6 and greater, 6 feet. Because if you're sitting 6 feet away from somebody and they're just not being compliant, or they're not wearing their mask properly and they release it into the air, it will travel, but it should not reach you if you're at least 6 feet or greater from the person. But keep in mind that if you walk in that space between you and that person without properly wearing your mask, then that you could have been 20 feet away. Once you walk into that area and it has access to your nose or your mouth, you could theoretically be infected.
Okay, well, that was great. I think we covered all the questions that we got today. And I don't know if you're reading all the comments that we're getting, but people are just blown away by your presentation, your honesty, the wealth of information that you shared tonight. We can't thank you enough for just blessing us with all of that. So, on behalf of the ATA, I want to thank you. And Roxanne, do you want to come in and say anything?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Deanne. And thank you, Dr. Eadie. This was very wonderful. And I am so happy with those of you that decided to join us on a Thursday night. And when Dee and I thought about having this presentation, and just the thought that we're a tennis organization, why are we having this presentation? We're a tennis organization. And I really was really pushing for this because I thought this would be very, especially for Black History Month, that this would be very interesting to have this conversation. And that we're more than a tennis organization. We are a organization that should be one that people can go to with questions, and that we should represent the whole community and what is going on in our world. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you, Dr. Reggie, again, for your wonderful presentation. Thank you, Deanne, for facilitating this. And I hope every one of you have a wonderful night. And also join us again. We're going to be sending out some information. We have a couple more webinars that are going to be coming up for the before the end of February. And we'll be sending out things to you. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Roxanne, can I
Yes.
First of all, thank your audience. There's a million other things that they could be doing at 6 o'clock on a Thursday night. Thank you, Deanne. Deanne was amazing. I had no idea how good she was until she took charge. So thanks, Deanne. And then Roxanne, thank you for your leadership. One thing about this pandemic if there is a silver lining in here, I think the silver lining is probably the fact that we can't leave one single community behind. So
Right.
I applaud you all. Although you represent tennis, you also represent the tennis players, their friends, their family, the people in the stands. And so I am not surprised that you're doing this, and I invite you to do more of it. You know, so although we all came to this country on different ships, this pandemic has placed us all on the same boat. And so we all have to link up, protect each other, protect our loved ones, our friends, and our family. And it's conversations like this, and it's organizations and leaders like you, Roxanne, that make this happen. So God bless you, and thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank
Good
you
night,
so
everyone.
much. Thank you.
Bye-
Thank
bye
you.
now.